Hi guys, welcome back. It's Nancy. I just filmed the first video series of what I call Beginner Stampers 101. So this will be part 2 of that, which is if you want to step up your stamping a little bit, what I think you should invest in to just move a little further in your stamping quality, your card making qualities. These are my opinions. There's a lot of videos out there with a lot of different styles and card makers. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them below, and any comments that you think would help out beginner stampers, also post those below. So in the other video, I started out with talking about paper, and I said I just use a inexpensive, heavy 110 pound cardstock to make my own card bases. And then when you're doing your stamp quality on top, I use Neenah Solar White usually, or Gina K, or Stampin' Up! Whisper White for my stamp, the cover layer, top layer. The next thing I would say is some kind of watercolor paper. So I usually use the Tim Holtz watercolor paper, which is already pre-cut. It has a textured side and a smooth side. And you would want to use that again with the VersaFine ink, and either heat set it or let it dry before you start stamping it. The other kind of watercolor paper that I have is, I just find inexpensive watercolor paper that's out on the market, because I'm not big into watercoloring. I'm not an artist. I just use it for stamping and coloring in. So here's an inexpensive quality Strathmore watercolor paper. There's a lot of different brands out there in terms of watercolor paper. If you're looking for another specialty paper, I would recommend highly picking up a pad of the Strathmore Bristol Smooth Surface paper. And you want to take a look at this. Bristol Smooth Surface. This is great paper for doing any kind of blending. If you're going to be doing distress ink blending for backgrounds, if you're going to be doing color pencils with Gamsol coloring and blending, if you're going to be doing zig marker blendings, distress marker blending, this is a very excellent, smooth quality paper to make the blending very nice, seamless. It makes you look like a better artist, honestly. So this is a good quality paper to pick up. 20 sheets in here. Big box stores carry it. Artist stores carry it. And don't forget, you can use your coupon at the big box stores. A technique that a lot of stampers use is called masking. So I would recommend picking up Post-it super sticky edge to edge Post-it. So this is sticky not just at the top, but edge to edge. So what this will do is, when you are making a mask, you can buy expensive masking paper. This is stamping Inkadinkadoo stamping mask paper. This is 12 sheets. You can see this was $9. It comes in these big sheets. You stamp on the white side, you cut out your image, and then you have a mask. This is great if you want to create scenes, put things in the foreground, background, make backgrounds. But Post-it tape is going to come in very handy. Another way you can buy the Post-it tape is it comes in strips now, and there's a smaller 1-inch strip, 2-inch strips, but I would invest in Post-it tape for another technique that you can use in stamping. As far as how I inventory my items, because once your collection starts to grow, you want to make sure that you're not buying duplicates. I try to inventory my inks. This is a little inventory book that I carry around with me. And so here you can see all my Spectrum Noir sparkle pens. Here you can see my Nuvo drops. So as your collection grows, here are my Distress Oxide inks. Keep some kind of a notebook when you start acquiring items. I even have some of my stamps, my Copic markers in here. Just so I know, okay, I don't want to go out and buy that. I already have that. Here's my distress sprays, my alcohol inks, things like that. So I would recommend highly an inventory book as your collection grows. And you're going to be putting your stamps, your inks, your markers, your pencils, any embellishments that you have, your embossing folders, all kinds of things. Here's another way of having your inks swatched out, just so you can have them. I keep this in my desk drawer, so when I am stamping an image, I can swatch out the ink and say, okay, how is this going to look when I'm stamping my project? So not only for shopping, but also, you know, you don't want to pull out all of your inks and stamp them out. So I would recommend some kind of an inventory system to keep you organized. Okay, a big one that a lot of stampers do is obviously coloring. I shared a couple videos last week where I just invested in some Spectrum Noir sparkle pens. These are nice pens that you can color with directly, or you can watercolor. I swatched them out here just to see what they would look like. They have a nice sparkle to them, but I have several different coloring mediums. So you want to start getting into that if you think you're going to be coloring. I have all different kinds of color pencils. I just invested in a name brand color pencil, which is the, there we go, Prisma color pencils. From what I understand, these are very good with blending. Again, I'm not an artist, I'm just a card maker, but I wanted to step up the quality that I was using. But I have these other color pencils which I've had for years, and there's all different ones in here. There's Crayola brand, there is Close to My Heart brand, there is General's brand. So all different brands of color pencils, and these work great with blending stubs and Gamsol. So if you're going to be coloring, color pencils are a nice way to start as well. You can put them on very lightly, and then you can grab some Gamsol and some blending stubs and color those out. And again, great to use with the Strathmore Bristol Smooth paper. By the way, guys, these little buckets, I picked these up at Target for $1, and I keep my markers and my pens in here. Zig color markers, and I know there's a new brand out there that Christina Warner and Jennifer McGuire have been talking about, the Arteza. I don't have those. I have other markers. Here's a brand that SAI Sai Japanese. These are great watercolor markers, and I'm sure you can find these on Amazon. They're inexpensive. These kind of look like the Arteza markers to me. Very inexpensive, but my point is they all do the same thing. You can even use Crayola markers. There's so many different companies out there. Here's some Stampin' Up! Brands. There's Tombow markers. There's so many different markers out there that are water-based markers that you can do a lot of watercoloring techniques with them. And that's all you would do is just stamp the image out with VersaFine ink. Let it dry or heat set it, and then you're going to take these markers and a little water brush. There's several different manufacturers out there with water brushes. So again, here's some here. This is, I don't know what brand this is, water brush, but it has a little pump on the end here so you can fill it with water, pull this out and pump that. Here's a Recollections brand. I got like a 3-pack of these for very inexpensively. These are the Ranger ones. Well, I got them as Ranger ones, but I don't think Ranger's the actual manufacturer. A lot of different size tips on them. But I would invest in 1 or 2 of these if you think you're going to get into watercoloring. The other way that you can also watercolor is if you want to invest in a non-stick Teflon mat, you can take Distress inks or these water-based markers, and you can use them to watercolor. So this is a non-stick craft mat. Again, there's a couple brands of companies that make these. You can take your ink pad down, smush it on there, get it a little wet with your water brush, and you can do simple watercoloring. And then when that's done, you just take a paper towel and clear that off, and it'll take the ink off of there. The other way that you could do it are to take some of these markers. Same thing, you're going to wet down your non-stick mat, you're going to take your water brush pen, and you're going to pick up that color, and you're going to be able to watercolor. So these are just ways that you can color with your ink pads. The Stampin' Up! Ink pads, you can actually press down on them, and it will put a little well of ink in the lid there. And there you can watercolor with it that way. So coloring or watercoloring with stamped images is huge right now. It's another way of giving dimension to your art and making it look like that you spent the time to take the time to color it in, draw it, blend it out. It just looks a lot nicer. And there are a lot of stamp companies that are coming out with more sketchy look stamps so that you have that ability. The last thing I would want to talk about in this video is heat embossing. And the other thing I didn't talk about in the first video is cleaning your stamps. I would just recommend, by the way, a microfiber towel and some kind of spray cleaner, either Hero Arts stamp cleaner or something that you are always cleaning up your surface and your stamps when you are done. But back to heat embossing. Heat embossing is something that I love to do in stamping, and I probably do it on almost all of my cards. It gives it a dimensional look. It looks more professional. I did a video a couple years back comparing heat guns. If you can afford the Wagner heat gun, I say go for it. It heats up quicker. It gets much hotter, and so it's just a smoother look to it. You can see mine is very well loved. It's been cracked up here, but it doesn't affect how it works. There's other stamp companies out there. Doris makes one. Marvy makes one. There's all kinds of companies that make heat embossing guns. So I would recommend that. You want a good Versamark ink pad. If you're also going to be stamping, you could even use pigment inks or distress oxide inks. If you only invest in one color, I would invest in clear and maybe white embossing powder, but clear mostly, because you can virtually stamp an image in any color distress oxide or pigment ink and put clear embossing powder over it. You can use clear embossing powder for a resist look. Some kind of a heat embossing anti-static tool. So this is the EK Success one. I know a lot of people don't like this because it does have a smell to it, almost like baby powder. And some people are sensitive to that. You can make your own with cornstarch in a little old stocking. You can buy embossing bags, embossing buddies from Gina K, from Stampin' Up. There's a lot of companies that make them. But you always want to treat your surface with this before you stamp. And what it will do is it puts down that little coating of powder so that if there are any fingerprint marks from your hands, oils, grease, then that area is going to be dry until you're ready to stamp an image with it. But embossing is something that definitely, I think, steps it up a notch. So you need a heat tool, you need an anti-static tool, you need a clear embossing powder. I would recommend Ranger's Ultra Fine Clear Embossing Powder. And I'll just show you that. Here it is. Super fine detail powder. Okay. I don't ever use black because if I wanted to emboss something in black, I stamp it in my VersaFine ink and then cover it with clear, and then it looks like it's black heat embossed. You really don't need too many colors of heat embossing. It's nice. I have several colors. The glitter ones are very nice. But really, if you're just starting out with heat embossing, this is the only one you need. The other one would be white, opaque white, and that's because if you're going to be stamping any kind of sentiments on black paper and you wanted them to show up, I would use white instead of white ink. If you didn't have a choice and you wanted to use white ink, a good white ink that I would recommend is Stampin' Up! White Craft ink. A word of caution, it takes a very long time for this to dry, which is where the heat tool comes in. So when you hear somebody say heat set it, that's where you're going to use this tool and just lightly blow over it. When you're doing your coloring, your watercoloring, you can use this tool so the heat tool comes in very handy. The other thing I would recommend getting is some kind of glossy accents. This is a nice clear raised dimension, almost like an epoxy that you would put over your stamped images, and it gives it a raised dimensional look. It looks shiny. If you're doing flowers and you want something to look like dewdrops, you could put a couple drops. If you're doing animals and you want their eyes to look like their three-dimensional eyes, you put a little of this on there. Glossy accents comes in very handy with just giving that raised effect. If you're going to put glitter under something, you put this over it. It'll lock the glitter in place and still give it that shiny effect. I would invest in a little jar of this, and it goes a long way. Same with the embossing powder. A little of this goes a long, long way. You might want to also invest in some coffee filters. It makes it so much easier when you are stamping. You're going to stamp the image, cover it with the embossing powder, tap it off into here, funnel this back into the jar and reuse it. So that would be my recommendations if you're going to step up into a little more of stamping. Besides basic stamping, I would recommend getting into coloring with either markers, watercolor pens, color pencils, any of those things if you're going to step it up. And then a couple of specialty inks like the Versamark ink and the White Craft ink. And then, of course, heat embossing. So that's video number 2 for stepping up in terms of your crafting. The third video I'm going to upload, guys, is going to talk a little bit more about embossing and using like a embossing machine, a Big Kick, a Gemini Junior, and furthermore stepping it up with a Silhouette or a Cricut machine. So I hope you like this video, guys. If you have any questions, please post it below. If you have any comments as well, I love seeing what you guys have to say to me. I learn from you guys as well as you guys learning from me. And keep on stamping.